lost Apache woman, a lone cowboy, and a second chance. The sun was low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the vast desert. The wind whispered through the canyons and dry brush, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. Jacob Hayes rode slowly along the trail, his horse, Rust, plodding steadily under the weight of the saddle and the rider's own tired shoulders. Jacob had been on the road for weeks, moving from one small town to another, never staying long enough to let anyone get close. People knew him as a quiet man, sometimes gruff, sometimes polite, but always alone. Life had taught him that attachments brought pain, and Jacob was no stranger to pain. His hands were rough, calloused from years of hard work, and his eyes carried the weight of sorrow that words could not describe. He was haunted by memories of a family he had lost many years ago, a wife and a young daughter taken from him in a sudden fire. Since then he had wandered, carrying the ghost of their absence wherever he went. Yet, despite the sorrow, Jacob had a sense of honor and kindness that he rarely showed. He helped those in need quietly, without seeking praise or reward. That evening, as the sky turned from gold to deep orange, Jacob heard a faint sound, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was the rustling of leaves or the cry of some desert animal, but then it came again, a soft, human cry, weak and trembling. Jacob's horse pricked its ears, sensing something unusual. The cowboy slowed Rust to a walk, scanning the rocky canyon nearby. He squinted against the fading sunlight and spotted a small figure crouched near a cluster of stones. Jacob dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the dry earth. As he approached, he saw a young woman sitting on the ground, her clothing torn and dusty, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. Her dark hair was tangled, and her eyes, wide and fearful, met his with a mixture of hope and caution. She was clearly lost, exhausted, and afraid of the open desert that stretched endlessly around them. "Hey there," Jacob said gently, keeping his voice calm and steady. "You okay? Need some help?" The woman flinched slightly at his voice, instinctively moving back, but there was something in his tone that made her hesitate. After a moment, she nodded faintly, too weak to speak. Jacob noticed that she had several scratches on her arms and legs, and she was shivering slightly despite the warm evening air. He quickly removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, offering her some comfort. "I'm Jacob," he said. "You lost." She nodded again, still too weak to speak, and Jacob realized she must have been wandering alone for a long time. "Don't worry. We'll get you somewhere safe," he said. He helped her to her feet and with careful steps guided her to Rust. He lifted her gently onto the horse, holding her steady, and climbed up behind her, keeping his hands ready to protect her if needed. As they rode slowly through the canyon, Jacob tried to learn more about her, but she remained silent, only glancing at him occasionally with wary eyes. He respected her hesitation, knowing that trust could not be forced. Instead, he focused on getting them both safely to a nearby flat area where they could rest. The desert was unforgiving at night, and Jacob knew that exposure could be deadly for someone in her condition. Once they reached a small, sheltered clearing, Jacob set up a fire, gathering dry wood and kindling with practiced hands. The flames flickered and danced, casting warm light against the rocks. He offered her a canteen of water which she took with trembling hands, drinking slowly. Jacob waited patiently, understanding that she needed time to recover before she could speak. As she drank, Jacob studied her more closely. There was a quiet strength in her, despite her exhaustion and fear. Her eyes told a story of survival, of someone who had endured hardship but refused to give up completely. She was different from anyone he had met before. He sensed that she belonged to a world very different from his own, a world full of traditions and knowledge that he could never fully understand, but he felt drawn to her nonetheless. The night grew darker, and the stars began to twinkle overhead, brilliant and countless against the black sky. Jacob kept the fire between them, a small circle of warmth in the vast, cold desert. He spoke softly, telling her about the stars and the trails he had traveled, sharing small stories of the towns he had passed through and the people he had met. He didn't push her to respond, but he hoped his presence would show her that he meant no harm. Eventually she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I got lost," she said. Her accent and tone were unfamiliar, melodic and soft. "I was hunting. I got separated." Jacob nodded, listening carefully. "It's all right. You're safe now. I'll make sure nothing happens to you." She shivered again, and Jacob moved closer, offering a reassuring hand. "Don't be afraid. You don't have to do this alone." There was a long silence as the two of them sat by the fire, the crackling flames the only sound in the vast emptiness. Jacob could see the tension slowly leave her body, though her eyes remained watchful. He understood that trust would take time, and he was willing to give it. He had spent years alone, learning patience and the quiet ways of the desert. He knew that survival depended not just on skill, but also on the connections one made along the way. As the night deepened, Jacob prepared a small meal from what he had in his pack, offering it to her. She hesitated at first, but hunger and exhaustion won over, and she accepted. Eating together in silence, they began to form an unspoken bond. There was an understanding between them. Both had known loss, both had walked alone, and both now depended on this fragile moment of companionship. Before they settled down to rest, Jacob made sure Rust was comfortable, feeding and watering the horse. He checked the surroundings carefully, keeping watch even as exhaustion tugged at his own body. There were dangers in the desert at night, wild animals, sudden storms, even men with ill intentions, but Jacob felt a deep sense of responsibility. This woman's safety was now his duty, and he would not fail her. Finally, as the fire dwindled to glowing embers, Jacob motioned for her to lie down on the soft blanket he had spread. She hesitated, then sank onto it, curling up as if trying to make herself as small as possible. Jacob sat nearby, keeping watch until sleep finally claimed him as well. In the quiet desert, surrounded by the vast emptiness and the faint whispers of the wind, two strangers had come together, drawn by fate and circumstance. One was a wandering cowboy carrying the weight of his past, the other a lost woman with unknown origins and a story yet untold. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, both felt a glimmer of hope. They had survived the day, and in doing so, had begun a journey that would change their lives forever. The desert, harsh and unyielding, had become a place of meeting, a place where paths crossed, where hearts cautiously opened, and where the possibility of a second chance quietly waited. And so, under the vast, starlit sky, with the soft wind carrying the scent of sage and the faint rustle of distant animals, Jacob Hayes and the lost Apache woman took their first steps toward trust, friendship, and an uncertain future, together. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The warmth spread over the rocky terrain, and the wind carried the fresh scent of dry earth. Jacob Hayes stirred, careful not to wake the lost woman who still slept under the blanket he had given her. Rust, his loyal horse, was already nibbling at the sparse grass near the edge of the clearing. Jacob stretched and rubbed his face, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the night spent keeping watch. When the woman finally awoke, she blinked against the bright sunlight, her dark eyes wary but curious. She looked around, noticing that the fire had burned down to glowing embers and that Jacob was sitting nearby, quietly observing her. "Good morning," Jacob said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Did you sleep all right?" She hesitated, then nodded. I think so," she replied, her voice still fragile. "Thank you for helping me." Jacob gave a small nod, brushing some dust from his jacket. "You're welcome. I told you you're safe here." He motioned toward the remnants of the fire. "We should eat something before we start moving again. There's a long day ahead." The woman, who Jacob now knew was named Ayana, watched him carefully as he prepared a simple breakfast of bread and dried meat from his saddlebag. She had not spoken much since he had found her, but her eyes betrayed a mix of fear and gratitude. Eating in silence, they established a quiet routine, a rhythm that seemed to ease some of the tension between them. Once they had eaten, Jacob helped Ayanna onto Rust, making sure she was steady before climbing up behind her. He knew the desert was unforgiving, and even small mistakes could lead to serious injury. The morning was calm, the sky a clear blue, and the two set off along the rocky trail. Jacob rode carefully, glancing at her every now and then, ensuring that she was comfortable. As they traveled, Jacob realized that Ayanna had remarkable knowledge of the land, even though she was lost. She pointed out certain plants and told him which ones could be eaten or used for medicine. She noticed subtle changes in the wind and the sky, predicting when a storm might come. Jacob had lived in the desert for years, but he found himself impressed by her awareness. "You're very observant," he said, watching her scan the horizon. "You know your way around the land." Ayanna nodded slowly. I grew up here near the mountains. My people taught me many things." She paused, glancing down at her hands. "But I got separated. I don't know the way back." Jacob stayed silent for a moment, considering her words. He could feel the worry and fear in her voice, and he wanted to help. "Don't worry," he said finally. "We'll find your people. I'll help you get home." Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment there was trust. Ayanna had spent days alone, unsure if anyone would come to her aid. Jacob's presence, his quiet strength and calm manner, gave her a small sense of hope. As they rode, the landscape changed. The flat desert gave way to rocky cliffs and sparse vegetation. They encountered small animals, lizards scurrying over stones, rabbits darting into the brush, but no other humans. The isolation was both comforting and frightening. Jacob knew they were safe from townspeople who might not understand Ayanna, but the wilderness itself could be unforgiving. That afternoon, they stopped near a small creek. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. Jacob helped Ayanna down from Rust, and she cupped her hands to drink. The sound of water brought a sense of peace, and even Jacob felt some of the weight of his past lift, if only slightly. "You need to rest," Jacob said. "We've been traveling for a long time, and it's important to keep your strength up." Ayanna sat on a flat rock, her eyes scanning the flowing water. I don't know if I can make it," she admitted softly. "I've been alone for days. I'm tired." Jacob knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think," he said, "and you're not alone anymore. I'm here. We'll get through this together." For a moment, Ayanna said nothing, but she allowed him to stay close. The bond between them, fragile but real, was growing. Jacob realized that trust was not something that could be demanded. It had to be earned, slowly and patiently. And in this quiet moment by the creek, trust began to take root. After a short rest, they continued their journey. Jacob led the way, keeping an eye on the sun to judge their direction. Ayanna followed, sharing observations about the land and pointing out hidden paths that made travel easier. They spoke sparingly, not because they had nothing to say, but because the silence itself was comforting. Words were unnecessary when they understood each other's intentions and the need for caution. As the day wore on, the sky darkened slightly, and clouds began to gather. Jacob recognized the signs of a coming storm and decided to find shelter. They reached a small cave nestled in the side of a rocky hill, just large enough for them and Rust to fit. Jacob gathered firewood while Ayanna explored the entrance, her movements careful and deliberate. "Be careful with the fire," she warned. "It can spread quickly in dry areas." Jacob smiled faintly, impressed. "I've learned a few things over the years, don't worry." As the fire crackled and warmth spread through the cave, Jacob and Ayanna sat nearby, sharing the small space. The storm began outside, wind and dust swirling, but inside the cave they felt safe. For the first time in days, Ayanna allowed herself to relax, leaning slightly against Jacob as he tended the fire. "You've helped me more than I can say," she said quietly. I don't even know your name." "Jacob Hayes," he replied. "And you are?" "Yana," she said. I come from the Apache people." Jacob nodded, listening carefully. He had heard stories of the Apache, their courage and wisdom, but he knew little of their ways. "Well, Ayana, it looks like we make a good team," he said with a small smile. Ayana returned the smile, a brief flicker of warmth in her eyes. It was the first real sign of connection between them, a small spark of hope in a harsh and lonely world. As the night grew darker, the storm raged outside, but inside the cave, they found comfort in each other's presence. They shared stories of their pasts. Jacob spoke of the towns he had passed through, carefully omitting the painful details of his family's loss, while Ayana told him of her childhood in the mountains, her family, and the lessons her people had taught her about survival and respect for the land. Through these stories, they began to understand each other, not just as strangers thrown together by fate, but as two people who had faced hardships and learned to survive. There was a quiet respect growing between them, a bond that went beyond words. As sleep finally approached, they settled near the fire, feeling the warmth against the cold wind outside. Jacob kept watch for a while longer, his mind alert for any danger, but he felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. For the first time since his long journey began, he felt that perhaps there was a reason for this meeting, a chance to heal old wounds and forge a connection that might change both their lives. Yana, exhausted from the day's journey and the emotional strain of her ordeal, slept soundly, her trust in Jacob growing with each passing hour. And Jacob, the lone cowboy wandering through the desert, allowed himself a small measure of hope, realizing that sometimes the hardest journeys brought the most unexpected companions and the most valuable lessons about trust, courage, and friendship. In the desert, under a sky full of stars and the distant sound of thunder, a cowboy and a lost Apache woman took another step in their journey together. It was a journey not just of survival, but of learning, healing, and slowly opening their hearts to the possibility of trust and connection. They did not know what challenges lay ahead, but for now, they had found a fragile peace, and that was enough to keep them moving forward. The next morning, the desert greeted Jacob and Ayana with a golden light that reflected off the rocky cliffs and dry brush. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the air fresh and cool, carrying a faint scent of rain and wet earth. Rust, Jacob's horse, snorted and shook the water from his coat as they prepared to leave the cave. The desert, though calm, was still dangerous, and Jacob knew they had to stay alert. Yana had rested well through the night, her strength slowly returning. She was quiet as they set off, her eyes scanning the horizon with the same sharp awareness she had shown the day before. Jacob noticed her skill and knowledge, realizing that she had been trained to survive in the wilderness. She pointed out signs in the sand, small animal tracks, the direction of the wind, and the subtle changes in plant life that he might have overlooked. "You have a good eye," Jacob said as they moved along a narrow canyon trail. "I wouldn't have noticed those tracks if you hadn't pointed them out." Yana smiled faintly. "The land, it tells you many things," she said. "If you know how to watch, you will know where water is, where animals hide, and when danger is near." Jacob nodded thoughtfully. He had spent years traveling the desert alone, but there was always more to learn. Yana's knowledge reminded him that even someone wandering for a long time could find guidance in unexpected ways. They traveled for several hours, stopping occasionally to let Rust graze and to rest themselves. The desert stretched endlessly around them, the silence broken only by the wind and the occasional call of a bird. Despite the calm, Jacob remained watchful. The desert was unpredictable, and he knew that danger could come from many sources: wild animals, sudden storms, or even men who had ill intentions. As they rounded a bend in the canyon, Jacob spotted movement ahead. A small group of men appeared, riding fast horses and carrying weapons. They were outlaws, notorious in the region for robbing travelers and causing trouble. Jacob slowed Rust and gestured for Ayanna to stay close. She understood immediately, her body tense but calm. "Stay behind me," Jacob whispered. "Don't make any sudden moves." The outlaws noticed them and spurred their horses forward. Jacob assessed the situation quickly. They were outnumbered, but he had experience with danger, and he could use the terrain to his advantage. He guided Rust to a narrow section of the canyon, where only one horse could pass at a time, forcing the outlaws to approach cautiously. Ayanna watched, her eyes wide but steady. She didn't speak, but Jacob sensed her trust in him. He had promised to keep her safe, and now he had to act. As the first outlaw approached, Jacob drew his gun, aiming carefully but not wanting to harm anyone unnecessarily. The outlaw hesitated, unsure of Jacob's skill. "Go back," Jacob called out firmly. "Leave us alone and no one gets hurt." The men laughed and pressed forward, but Jacob was ready. He fired a warning shot, sending sand and rocks flying near them. Ayanna flinched slightly, but Jacob held her steady, his calm presence reassuring her. The outlaws slowed, realizing that Jacob was not an ordinary traveler. His determination, skill, and courage made them hesitate. Using the narrow canyon to their advantage, Jacob guided Rust skillfully, creating obstacles that slowed the outlaws. Ayanna, inspired by his bravery, suggested a hidden path through some rocks that could give them a better escape route. Together, they maneuvered through the terrain, staying one step ahead of danger. Finally, after tense moments of careful riding and quick thinking, the outlaws gave up, their frustration evident as they turned back. Jacob exhaled slowly, feeling the tension leave his body. He glanced at Ayanna, who was gripping the reins tightly but smiling faintly. "You did well," he said. "You kept calm and your advice helped us escape." Ayanna nodded, a small spark of pride in her eyes. "We make a good team," she said softly. Jacob smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had been absent for many years. He had spent so long alone, trusting no one, but now he realized that companionship could bring strength. Ayanna's courage and intelligence complemented his experience, creating a partnership neither had expected. After the encounter, they continued their journey cautiously. The sun climbed higher and the desert grew hotter, the rocks radiating heat. They stopped by a shaded area near a small grove of scrub trees to rest and drink water. Jacob carefully checked their supplies, making sure they had enough for the rest of the day. Ayanna helped, gathering edible plants and pointing out safe sources of water. As they rested, Jacob asked her about her family. Ayanna hesitated, her eyes darkening with sadness. I don't know if they are still looking for me," she admitted. "I got lost, and when I realized I could not find them, I felt very alone." Jacob listened, understanding her fear all too well. He had lost his own family in a sudden accident years ago and knew the feeling of helplessness. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "I'm here, we'll find your people and you'll be safe again." Ayanna looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and relief in her eyes. "Thank you, Jacob," she said. I trust you." The words were simple, but for Jacob they carried great meaning. Trust was not easily given, and Ayanna's willingness to rely on him strengthened his resolve to protect her. As the day went on, they navigated rocky trails, crossed shallow streams, and climbed small ridges. The journey was physically demanding, but it brought them closer together. They shared small stories along the way. Jacob spoke of his travels, the towns he had seen, and the people he had met. He avoided speaking of his deepest pain, but he allowed glimpses of his past to show Ayanna that even someone strong could have scars. Ayanna, in turn, shared memories of her childhood. She spoke of the mountains where she had grown up, the lessons her people had taught her, and the games she played with her siblings. Her stories were filled with color and life, painting a picture of a world Jacob had never known. Through these stories, Jacob learned not just about Ayanna, but about the culture and wisdom of her people. By late afternoon, they reached a plateau overlooking a wide valley. The view was breathtaking. The desert stretched endlessly, dotted with rocky outcrops and patches of green where water sustained life. Jacob and Ayanna paused to rest, taking in the sight. "This is beautiful," Ayanna whispered. I remember seeing places like this when I was a child." Jacob nodded, feeling a sense of peace. "It's amazing how the desert can be both harsh and beautiful at the same time," he said. "It teaches you respect and patience." As they prepared to descend into the valley, a sudden noise caught their attention. A pack of wild coyotes emerged from behind some rocks, their eyes glowing in the fading sunlight. They were hungry and curious, circling the area cautiously. Jacob moved in front of Ayanna, keeping a calm stance. "Stay close," he said. "We don't want to provoke them." Ayanna followed his lead, keeping quiet and steady. Jacob's experience with animals in the desert allowed him to assess their behavior and guide them safely past. The coyotes sniffed and growled but eventually lost interest, moving on to hunt elsewhere. After the close encounter, they pressed on, their bond stronger than ever. Ayanna admired Jacob's skill and courage, while Jacob valued her knowledge and composure. They had faced danger together, and the experience deepened the trust and respect between them. As the sun set, painting the sky with vibrant reds and purples, they found a small, sheltered area to set up camp for the night. Jacob started a fire while Ayanna prepared some food from their limited supplies. They ate in silence, content with the shared understanding that had grown between them. Before they settled down to rest, Jacob looked at Ayanna and said, "We've come a long way today. Tomorrow we'll continue, and I'm sure we'll get closer to your people." Ayanna nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. I feel stronger with you," she said. "Thank you, Jacob." Jacob felt a warmth in his heart, a feeling he had not experienced in many years. He had spent so long wandering alone, but now, with Ayanna by his side, he realized that courage, trust, and companionship could change everything. As the night fell and the desert grew quiet, they sat by the fire, feeling safe and connected despite the vast wilderness around them. The challenges of the day had tested them, but they had emerged stronger together. They had faced danger, survived the wilderness, and learned to rely on each other. And so, under the starry desert sky, the lone cowboy and the lost Apache woman continued their journey, their bond growing deeper with each step. They did not know what dangers lay ahead, but they knew they could face them together, finding strength, courage, and perhaps something more in each other. The morning sun had barely risen when Jacob and Ayanna packed their camp, preparing to continue their journey through the rugged desert. The previous days had tested their endurance, courage, and patience, but they had grown stronger together. Each step they took deepened their trust, and both felt a quiet comfort in the presence of the other. Rust moved steadily beneath them, knowing the routine and carrying them through the rocky trails with careful surefootedness. Ayanna rode a little closer to Jacob than usual, feeling a sense of safety in his calm, protective presence. Her confidence had grown since their journey began, but there was still a lingering worry in her heart, the uncertainty of finding her people. She had learned to survive alone, but the thought of never seeing her family again haunted her. "Do you think we'll find them soon?" she asked softly, her eyes scanning the distant horizon. Jacob glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "I believe so," he said. "We're moving in the right direction. The land can guide us if we pay attention, and we're not far from where you said your tribe usually hunts and gathers." Ayanna nodded, though her hands gripped the reins tightly. I hope they are still there. I've been gone too long." Jacob placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll get you back, and until then we'll keep each other safe." They continued their journey through a narrow canyon, the cliffs rising high on either side, casting shadows across the path. The air was dry, and the sun beat down strongly, making the rocks shimmer in the heat. They were careful to conserve their water, stopping only when necessary. Each time they paused, Ayana would scan the area, pointing out subtle signs of animals or water sources that Jacob might have missed. Her knowledge of the land impressed him more with every step. As the day progressed, the path became steeper and more treacherous. Loose rocks threatened to slip beneath Rust's hooves, and small ledges required careful maneuvering. Gianna felt her muscles growing tired, her legs weak from the long journey. She tried to hide it, not wanting to show weakness, but Jacob noticed. "You need to rest," he said firmly. "We've been traveling hard and you can't push yourself too far." I can manage," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Jacob stopped, dismounted, and held out his hand. "You don't have to manage alone. Let me help you." She hesitated, then took his hand. With his support, she carefully stepped down from Rust, leaning on him as they moved toward a small shaded area under an overhang. Jacob gave her water and helped her eat a little of their food. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes and knew she was near her limit. As Ayana rested, a shadow passed over her face. She suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest and doubled over, gasping for breath. Jacob immediately knelt beside her, alarmed. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice urgent. I don't know," she whispered, clutching her chest. "I feel weak, dizzy." Jacob's heart raced. He had faced many dangers in his life, but seeing someone he cared about in pain brought a new kind of fear. He quickly assessed her condition. She was pale, trembling, and struggling to breathe. It could be dehydration, exhaustion, or a sudden illness from the harsh desert. Whatever it was, she needed care and fast. "You're going to be okay," Jacob said firmly, keeping his voice steady to calm her. "I'm right here. We'll get through this together." He supported her as she struggled to stay upright. Gently, he guided her back to Rust, helping her mount the horse so he could hold her securely as they continued. The journey slowed to a crawl. Jacob scanned the terrain, searching for a safe place where they could rest and treat her. Every step was careful, his mind focused entirely on her well-being. Hours passed, and Ayana grew weaker, her head resting against Jacob's chest. He whispered encouragement, telling her stories of the desert, of small adventures and quiet moments, hoping his words would keep her alert. Though she was in pain, there was a sense of trust between them that made the fear bearable. She knew he would not leave her, and that thought gave her strength she did not realize she still had. Finally, they reached a small grove of trees near a creek. The sight of water brought relief to both of them. Jacob guided Ayana off Rust and helped her sit by the water's edge. He poured some water into her cupped hands and encouraged her to drink slowly. Her hands shook, but she managed to take a few sips. "You're doing well," Jacob said gently. "Just rest a little. The water will help and will get your strength back." Ayana leaned against him, exhaustion and relief mixing in her expression. For the first time, she allowed herself to admit how afraid she had been. I thought I might not make it," she whispered. "I've been alone too long, and now," Jacob's heart tightened. He had spent so long avoiding attachments, but hearing her fear stirred something deep inside him. "You're here now," he said, "and you're not alone anymore. I won't let anything happen to you." The afternoon passed slowly. Jacob built a small fire, careful to keep it safe from the dry brush, while Ayana rested. He checked her injuries and scratches from their previous journey, cleaning them gently and bandaging them. Though she was weak, there was a quiet strength in her demeanor, a determination not to give up. As the sun began to set, casting warm golden light across the trees and creek, Ayana spoke again. "Jacob, why do you help me?" she asked, her voice faint. Jacob paused, considering his words. He had spent years wandering alone, helping others quietly but never allowing himself to connect. Now, with Ayana, he realized the answer was simple. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said, "and because I see someone worth helping. Someone brave, strong, and human. We all deserve a chance to survive, to heal." Yana looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more hope. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to trust completely. She had been lost in the desert, alone and afraid, but Jacob's presence had given her a second chance, not just at survival, but at hope. The night fell, and the forest around them became quiet, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant sound of the creek. Jacob kept watch for a while, making sure Ayana was comfortable and safe. He felt a new responsibility, one that went beyond survival. He had spent so long avoiding attachments, but now he realized that caring for someone else could bring healing, not just to them, but to himself. Yana slept peacefully, her body finally resting after the long struggle. Jacob stayed awake, thinking about the journey ahead. They were close to her people, but the desert was unpredictable, and there were still dangers to face. Yet, despite the uncertainty, he felt a sense of purpose he had not known in years. Protecting Ayana, helping her find her way home, and sharing this journey had given him a reason to keep moving forward. He watched the stars above, brilliant and countless against the night sky, and realized that life could offer second chances when least expected. The lost Apache woman before him was not just someone to protect. She was a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, trust, courage, and connection could bring hope. As the fire's warmth faded and the night grew colder, Jacob finally allowed himself a moment of rest. Tomorrow, they would continue toward her people, facing whatever challenges lay ahead. But tonight, they were safe together, and that was enough. For the first time in a long while, both Jacob and Yana felt that perhaps the world was not entirely unforgiving. They had survived danger, faced fear, and discovered the strength of trust and companionship. The journey was far from over, but the turning point had come. The moment when vulnerability became courage, fear became hope, and two souls, lost in different ways, found a chance to heal together. The morning air was cool and clear, carrying the faint scent of desert sage and distant pine. Jacob and Ayana had rested well through the night, the creek nearby providing a gentle, calming soundtrack to their early morning preparations. Yana felt stronger now, her body rested and her spirit renewed. For the first time since being lost, she felt a quiet confidence that she could reach her people, and that she would not face the journey alone. Jacob carefully packed their supplies, making sure Rust was ready for the day. He had spent the past days guiding Ayana, keeping her safe, and teaching her to rely on her knowledge and instincts. In turn, she had taught him patience, trust, and the quiet joy of companionship. Their journey together had changed them both, and the bond between them had grown strong, unspoken but undeniable. "Are you ready?" Jacob asked, offering Ayana a small, encouraging smile. She nodded, mounting Rust with ease. "Yes," she said. "I think I'm ready to see my people again." The trail ahead led through rolling hills and a series of small canyons. The desert, once harsh and unyielding, now seemed welcoming in a strange way. Jacob marveled at how different the same landscape felt when shared with someone else, when danger was balanced by trust, and solitude was replaced by companionship. As they traveled, Ayana pointed out signs she recognized, certain patterns of rocks, the tracks of familiar animals, and the subtle shifts in wind that indicated a nearby water source. Jacob followed her guidance, trusting her instincts and knowledge completely. For the first time in years, he felt that he could rely on someone else, and it was a comforting and unfamiliar feeling. By late afternoon, the landscape opened into a wide valley dotted with trees, small streams, and patches of green. Jana's eyes lit up with recognition. "We're close," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of relief and excitement. I can see it. My tribe must be nearby." Jacob felt a surge of pride and joy. They had faced countless challenges together, harsh desert terrain, wild animals, dangerous outlaws, and the constant threat of exhaustion. Yet they had persevered, relying on each other's strengths and courage. Now at the end of their long and difficult journey, the reward was in sight. As they approached the edge of a small forest, they saw figures moving in the distance. Iana's heart leaped. Children played near the water, women gathered firewood, and men tended to horses and tools. Her eyes scanned the area, finally resting on familiar faces, family members and elders who had searched for her, hoping against hope that she would return. Tears welled in Iana's eyes, and she felt a mixture of joy, relief, and gratitude. She turned to Jacob, her expression full of emotion. I can't believe it," she whispered. "They're here. My family, they're safe." Jacob smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "You made it," he said softly, "and you're not alone anymore." They moved closer, and Iana's family spotted her. Shouts of joy and relief echoed through the valley as she ran toward them, leaving Jacob and Rust a few steps behind. Her parents embraced her tightly, tears streaming down their faces, while siblings and relatives crowded around to touch her, to hold her, and to celebrate her safe return. Iana turned back to look at Jacob, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Jacob," she said softly, stepping forward, "thank you for everything." Jacob nodded, humbled and moved. He had never expected recognition or praise, yet her words carried more weight than any reward. "You're welcome," he replied. "I'm glad you're safe." The elders approached, their expressions cautious at first, but Jacob's calm demeanor and the evident care he had shown for Iana quickly earned their trust. They asked questions, and he answered simply and honestly, explaining how he had found her lost and weak, guided her through the desert, and protected her from danger. The tribe's initial wariness turned to respect as they saw that he had risked his own safety to ensure hers. Iana's father stepped forward, placing a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "You are a good man," he said. "You have saved our daughter's life, and for that, we are grateful." Jacob nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest that he had not felt in years. Gratitude and respect were rare, but in this moment they were real and meaningful. He realized that his wandering days might be over, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he had found a place where he could belong, even if only partially. Over the next few days, Jacob stayed with Iana and her people, learning more about their customs, their way of life, and the wisdom passed down through generations. He helped with daily tasks, earning their trust through his actions rather than words. Iana guided him, showing him how to respect their traditions while also integrating him into their routines. The bond between Jacob and Iana deepened. They spent quiet moments together by the creek, talking about their journey, their fears, and their dreams. Jacob shared memories of his lost family, and Iana listened with compassion, offering understanding and comfort. She spoke of her own fears and hopes, and together they found solace in each other's company. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jacob and Iana stood on a hill overlooking the valley. The tribe was settled below, the fires flickering warmly as night fell. Iana turned to Jacob, a soft smile on her lips. "I don't want this to end," she said. "I don't want us to go back to being strangers." Jacob reached for her hand, holding it gently. "It doesn't have to end," he said. "We've been given a second chance, not just to survive, but to find something more, something worth holding onto." Iana's eyes glistened with tears of joy. "Then, let's not waste it," she said. From that moment, their lives took on a new rhythm. Jacob, once a lone cowboy wandering through the desert with nothing but his memories for company, had found purpose, belonging, and love. Iana, who had known fear and isolation, had discovered trust, courage, and hope. Together, they faced the future with renewed strength, knowing that the journey that had brought them together was only the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The days passed with shared laughter, stories, and quiet moments of reflection. Jacob learned the ways of Iana's people, respecting their traditions while offering his own experiences and skills. Ayanna thrived in her home, comforted by the presence of her family and strengthened by the bond she shared with Jacob. Though the past had been full of pain and uncertainty for both of them, the present offered a chance to heal. They had survived the desert, overcome danger, and learned the true meaning of trust and companionship. And now, standing together under the endless sky, they realized that life had given them a second chance, not just at survival, but at love, friendship, and the possibility of happiness. In the quiet moments of dawn, when the valley was still and the world seemed to hold its breath, Jacob and Ayanna would often sit together by the creek, watching the water ripple and listening to the sounds of life around them. They spoke little, for words were not always necessary. Their presence was enough, a promise of safety, trust, and shared hope. The desert, once a symbol of isolation and hardship, had become the place where two lost souls found each other. It had tested them, challenged them, and shaped them into people who could face anything together. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting warmth and light across the valley, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side, carrying the lessons of the journey and the bond that had grown from it. Jacob and Ayanna's story became a